All right, hello helpers, and welcome to the Mental Health Toolbox. Today we have a special guest, Marc Azoulay, who's going to be talking to us all about men's mental health and what we can do as therapists, as helpers, clinicians, to make sure that we're being inclusive for some of the challenges that come along with addressing accessing mental health care as a male and some of the stigma and hurdles and challenges and friction that oftentimes men can encounter along the way when seeking help. So, just going to give you a little bit of background here on Marc and the wonderful work he's doing. Marc is an LPC, among other things. He's the founder of Men's Online Therapy Community, which is a healing hub for men who want to get back on their feet to take their lives to the next level. With the help of his team of licensed clinicians, he provides ongoing men's groups, individual counseling, and powerful wilderness retreats to his members. With a background in psychoanalysis, neuroscience, and Buddhism, Marc is able to help men uncover and destroy unconscious barriers that hold them back. His mission is to help them become the best possible versions of themselves and truly show up for their lives, communities, and relationships. So, I think that about sums it up, but we're going to dive into all of that and the wonderful work you're doing, Marc. Basically, we're breaking down barriers to mental health and recovery for men. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the mission, break down that stigma and get more guys talking to more guys.
Excellent. So this is, if you're watching this live, feel free to jump in. This is just a fireside chat we're having about mental health and the work he's doing and the wonderful services he can offer and insights to us as therapists and how we can maybe change the lens by which we're doing our work with men, maybe find some interventions, some low-hanging fruit that we can adjust and be a little, maybe address some implicit bias or become more aware of some of the challenges that maybe we aren't, right? So we can be of better service. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. So feel free if
totally.
you have any questions, guys, jump in, drop a comment, drop a question, and we're just going to roll. All right. So, Marc, did you want to share, of course, how you got into this specific niche of men's mental health and building out what's more? I mean, this is more than a group practice we're looking at. This is a full-on, I don't know what you'd call it. It's like a community for sure. I was, poking around in your website and the work you're doing and all the services you offer from individual therapy to the retreats and men's groups and all the thought. I just looking at even the layout of your website, all the thought that went into this work you're doing, let alone the podcast and everything. So I'm excited to just learn how you got into this work and more about your background.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I spent a lot of time on the website and yeah, the program, yeah, community, for the clinicians out there, we kind of like an a la carte IOP is what I've been kind of marketing it as, where guys
Mm-hmm.
can dial up and dial down their engagement. But, as we know, right, like community is really what heals. Therapy is a vehicle. And I think it gets guys talking more openly and, more emotionally and building their EQ. But really, we're going for that community. And the goal is that the guys are at each other's funerals, that they're making like lifelong
Yeah. Yeah.
friendships. So yeah, I mean, like what got me into it is, very, very long story short, I'm in recovery from drug addiction. I was an
Mm-hmm.
addict in my early 20s. I did a lot of the traditional therapy stuff. I did AA for a number of years. I, went to rehab. I worked with a therapist. I did, all the, sobriety stuff. But what I realized that, well, my issue was really how I dealt with my masculinity,
Mm-hmm.
like the sobriety stuff got me stable, but it wasn't until I figured out like what it meant to be an honorable man and to really live a life that I was proud of that I feel like I truly recovered. And, I'm curious what your story was, but a common story for me and for a lot of millennial generation is that we were the nice guys. I was kind of like a doormat in a lot of my relationships. I was a yes
Mm-hmm.
man. I kind of just agreed with whatever, my partners were saying. And I was building a lot of resentment. And it was because I was afraid to be a man. I was raised in a culture where I was told that, men are assholes, men are predators, men are the problem with the world
Hmm.
today. And I really shut myself down as a way to, I think, try to be nice and try to, be attractive, try to get laid ultimately. And it didn't work. So I ended up building a lot of resentment, and I used drugs and alcohol to really cover that up too.
Wow, that's I'm so glad you shared because I thought, I didn't really think of it as a generational thing because I'm definitely a yes man. I'm definitely a people pleaser. Definitely, it's caused problems in past relationships with boundaries and resentment and things like that. Making oneself indisposable, only then turn around and feel not feel that reciprocation per se. Um, and I chalked it up to the way I grew up. I didn't really have a father figure so much. I was raised by my sister, very loving, very nurturing, right? And so I just thought, I was brought up to, from her personality kind of rubbed off on me, and so I kind of chalked it up to that. But yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. That's an interesting point that maybe it's a generational thing and maybe it's a pushback against a lot of the machismo and that idea that men don't cry, men don't show their feelings, and um, that kind of stuff rubs me the wrong way. And maybe I thought it was just the way I was raised, but maybe it's kind of just pushback against maybe the prior societal pressures, right?
Yeah, I
Or
think it definitely is. And I can dive into that, right? I mean, I think so. You have like toxic masculinity, right? Like if you're,
mm-hmm.
everyone knows what that is, right? It's like the
Yeah.
bully, Donald Trump type of masculinity, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
that was the boomer generation, and I think what they did is they looked at women, right? And they're like, I'm not going to be that. Like I don't know what it means to be a man, but I know I'm not a woman. So I'm going to be anti-woman. And that, of course, has all kinds of problems, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
misogyny being, a huge one. But the main thing, as far as for men as it goes, is that that's a very fragile way of building masculinity because it's an anti-personality, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's just what you said, Patrick, right? Like, don't cry, don't be emotional, don't ask for help. Like, it's not a don'ts, but it's not anything that is positive or that is generative. So then you
Mm-hmm.
have our generations. I'm not sure what generation you're in, but I think both Gen Xers and millennials, the Gen
I'm
Xers
43,
were
so.
okay. Yeah. 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 So Gen Xers, right? Like famously the
Mm-hmm.
latchkey kids, right? So it's
Right.
like
Yeah, I was away. Yeah, yeah.
y'all
Most
y'all
states.
weren't
Yeah.
raised with father figures,
Yeah.
right? Dad's out of the house. Dad is often like he is that boomer, So often, again, I don't know anything about your story, but some Gen Xers, suffered abuse, right? Or were in situations where they didn't fit into the traditional masculinity or that toxic masculinity. And millennials were the generation of divorce. More of us, over 50% of us, were raised in divorced homes. So very similar to Gen Xers, we also didn't have father figures, or the father figures we had were painted in a negative light, right? It was a lot of later on mom saying, hey, don't be like your father. Your father's the alcoholic. Your father was an asshole. Your father was, abusive to you, right? Like we're getting these very negative messages. So I think our generations looked at the boomer generation, right? And we're like, I'm not going to be that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to be a bully. I'm not going to be, closed off. I'm not going to be an alcoholic. I'm not going to be, a jerk, or I'm not going to be insensitive. So I think it's a better version, because it's less destructive, but it's still
Mm-hmm.
fragile, right? It's still an anti-personality, just like how the boomers were anti-women, we're anti-toxic masculinity. So what I had to figure out for myself and what I hope to instill in the clients and the work that I do is like, what's a positive version? Like what do you actually want to be instead of being anti something? So, yes, I'm curious for you, like,
Mm-hmm.
does that mirror any of your story, or do you
Oh,
see
for
that
sure.
in
Like
the
I
clients you work
knew
with?
definitely what I grown up, some of the things I saw, you
Yeah.
know, my stepdad, rest in peace. He struggled with alcoholism.
Mhm.
I saw the damage that did. And I, definitely, saw some things and how I want, how the kind of person I want to be, or the kind of person I didn't necessarily want to be.
Yeah.
To your point, but that doesn't necessarily, when we're talking about identity, for me, because the way I grew up, like I was, I grew up in trailer parks, motorhome parks across California. I didn't really have a lot of structure, definitely latchkey kid kind of
Yeah.
thing. And, my sister did great and her, now husband did great, looking out for me. And, but I had a lot of freedoms and not a whole lot of structure. Um, just kind of did my own thing, but I knew what I didn't want was poverty. So
Mhm.
as I discovered the power of education and I started to take it seriously, and I'll say I did have a definitely outside of my brother-in-law male role model figure that came into my life was my youth pastor at
Oh,
like
cool.
16.
Yeah.
And that was a
Great.
big deal. He's, between him and my sister, got my head straight. And I didn't think college was for people like me and that whole bit coming from my background. And I started to take those things seriously, but I just wanted to run away from poverty. So, but I grew up around a lot of conflict,
Hmm.
because of my stepdad's drinking and that kind of, I'm the youngest of all the children. So the way I learned to cope was just to kind of be, be quiet, don't rock the boat, sit in the background. And for me, even as an adult, I really have to push back against that sometimes when there is conflict, or and learn how to how to course correct a little bit. And I think that you find this oftentimes to be the case with people who tend to be on more passive side,
Hmm.
right? When I was first trying to learn how to be more assertive, I would overcorrect, not be more aggressive or passive aggressive, right? And
Yeah.
so even as a therapist, it's been a lot of work to really kind of find that middle ground. How to be assertive, how to state my needs, how to not forego my needs to make other people happy, because if everyone's not okay with me, then I'm not okay.
Hmm.
That kind of stuff. So that typical textbook people pleasing codependent behavior, right? So to your point though, like it's all stemmed from, I know what I don't want, right? I don't want conflict. I don't want to
Yeah.
be that guy who pushes back and rocks the boat, or you know has to over assert myself, or yell or scream. So I don't like yelling. I really
Mhm.
don't. Just because maybe it's the way I grew up. But I think to your point, there's a lot of that. I know the things I don't necessarily want to be. And I've learned, over time, the things I definitely do want to be as a father, as a husband. But it's easy to focus on, like you said, the anti personality.
Mhm.
So I made some progress there, but it's been a long journey for sure.
It's a long journey, yeah. And
Yeah.
it's one I'm still walking to, hoping to be a father soon. I know that's a whole nother level of the
Yeah.
journey, and similar to you, like, yeah, I don't like yelling. I grew up in a household that has a lot of yelling, and a lot of vicious yelling, right? Very mean yelling. So I didn't like that. And I was very quiet, kept my voice shut for a long time, didn't go anywhere near conflict, and it wasn't through after working through therapists that I realized I had to be assertive, just like you're saying, right? It's like there's a masculine force, right, or
Mm-hmm.
strength, as I would call it. I have a couple of virtues I can go through, but strength being one of them, which is it's just like pure energy. Yes, it can become violent, and the work is so it doesn't become violence, but it's to be able to really use strength in a way to get what we need and to be able to stand up and protect the people that we love. And that's like that. That's an art form, right? It's like the right use of force.
Absolutely. I like that. The right use of force, right? And for the right reasons.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It makes me think. So I studied Buddhism, and as
Mm.
part of that, I took like Zen archery. So I did like 3 years of Zen archery, and I'm not sure if you or your audience are familiar, but the
Yeah,
difference
I'm not.
between
Please, please.
yeah, between Zen archery and American archery or Western archery is really interesting. It tells you everything you know about the cultures, right? So
Mm.
when you think of like American or Western archery, right, or knights kind of thing, right? It's like it's about shooting the arrow as far as possible, right? So you have
Mm-hmm.
like the English longbowman, who's like just a giant bow. They shoot it. They could shoot it so powerfully that it would punch through armor, right? It punched through like plate
Mm-hmm.
mail, right?
Mm-hmm.
These things are like it's designed to like penetrate with as much force as possible. And there's so much of the Western ethos. It's like go as far and hard as fast as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's Zen archery, and Zen archery, the target is a bale of hay, right? And the idea is that you're supposed to notch the arrow in the hay. So
Oh.
it's about that right use of force. So if you go too
Mm-hmm.
hard, you go right through the hay, right? It just shoots all the way through it. And if you go too weak, obviously you don't hit the target. So it's a
Skee
totally
ball.
different practice. The practice is like, can you get the perfect amount
Right.
just to get it to stick right in that hay?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very powerful practice for me in learning how to like, integrate my strength and feel that, in a very visceral, physical way.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I'm sure that translates into how we do life, right? Some
Right.
of the philosophy.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
one of those beautiful Zen things, which is like, you do one thing and it kind of, yeah, ripples out into everything else.
Sure, sure, definitely a through line. Yeah. So, how much of your time did you spend learning the Buddhist culture, and what impact has that had on the kind of the way you do mental health, the way you do the service therapy to others?
Yeah. So, early in my recovery, like all addicts, I did an extreme thing or I thought of an extreme thing where I was like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I'm going to go to Cambodia and be a monk. Right. Which I didn't do that, spoiler, but the idea of that was like, I need to just like wipe the slate clean, destroy my life, start over, burn the boats. My family had an intervention for me. They all sat me down,
Mm-hmm.
which is funny because they didn't really do that with my drug use, but they did it with, this thing. And they're like, hey, don't go to Cambodia. Don't be a monk. You got to figure out something. So I went to Naropa University, which is here in Boulder, Colorado. It's a Buddhist
Mm-hmm.
university. So I studied contemplative psychotherapy, which is a Buddhist therapy kind of degree for 3 years. I got my master's in that. And as part of that, you do a 2 week silent meditation retreat every semester. So I did 6 of those. I did a Datun, which is like 3 months of silence at the Allegheny Zen Center in Pittsburgh. And then continuing, I would do, have a meditation practice and do like a retreat about a week, 10 days every year. So that helped me really get sober because for me, and it's not true for everybody, for me, I had trouble connecting with the higher power concept. But my higher power through AA was the present moment. I was like, I don't know if if I'm ready to sign off on a divinity yet, but I need to be present. I know that there's something for me in the present moment. There's truth. Eventually there's spirituality, right? I think there is God in the present moment. I think it all kind of connects to the same thing. But in that moment, like I was like, I can commit to being present, and I know that drugs and alcohol are making me less present. So that was a real powerful North Star for me, to just practice being alive and here.
Right. Right. And that's often the case with substances, right? Where men may not necessarily seek therapy, they will seek other things to numb the emotional pain, right?
Definitely. Yeah. Men will try everything before therapy,
Asking for help, admitting you have a problem. Yeah. I can fix it myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I find men often those things need to fail men for men to actually get into therapy. So they have to, unfortunately, like develop that substance use disorder, or have that second life or that affair, but get found out. Or for a lot of guys, it's like a divorce that puts them into therapy. It often takes a rock bottom moment because I think as men, I think we are like biologically not as aware of emotional nuance as women are. I think that's one of their superpowers that we don't have, but we can benefit from. And 2, there's so much stigma. We're not trained, we're not conditioned to start seeing a therapist when something feels off, when it just feels like a little wrong. Whereas with female clients, like they're like, yeah, my relationship, it's like, it's fine, but I want to optimize it. And it doesn't feel like something like a little bit weird, but I don't really know what it is. For a guy, they need to be like served divorce papers and
something needs to be on fire. Yeah.
Yeah, it's be on fire. Like to actually call somebody,
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, and again, I know there's that whole mentality of I'll fix it on my own. We'll, go on our own little walkabout and figure it out on our own. Don't necessarily like to take other people's counsel. What have you found to be the case in terms of what is one of the anti-appeals of therapy for men? Like, why is it scary? Is it just the idea of asking for help in general? Is it something that's been beat into men as in society?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so much. I can
yeah,
I can run through them. So I think first and foremost is like what you said, of asking for help means that you're weak, right? It means that you failed, that you're a pussy or something, right? I think also a lot of men, especially when they haven't done emotional work, there's this dominance hierarchy thing that comes into play, right? So, if me as a client go to you as a therapist and you're helping me, right, it means that you are better than me, right? I think a lot of men live in this very linear dominance hierarchy. And, if I'm feeling insecure because I'm, a young man that has done therapy, I don't want to be submissive to anybody. And it's a shame because I think being a father and being a mentor is the most masculine thing that you can do, right? Learning how to nurture as a man and love as a man is the prime masculinity. Forget about your job, forget about your career, forget about going to war. Like being a dad, or again, being a mentor if you decide not to have children, is the best, right? You're being a king, you're being like the ultimate archetype. And I think so many young men, me included, are very resistant to having a father or a mentor in their lives because they don't want to feel submissive. So I think that turns off a lot of guys. And I'll pause there because I'm curious what you think about that. And I got more that I can go through, but I'm curious your thoughts on the dominance hierarchy thing.
Yeah, no, I mean that makes sense. The way you frame it like that, because you see that in other facets of culture with men, the alpha mindset, nobody wants to be the underdog. We do kind of look around, who's in charge here. We're always, I think, as society in general, we already have that mindset to some extent. But yeah, to have to feel like you're submitting, I don't think I'd ever really thought about it like that in the therapy room. I know that a lot of men come in very guarded to therapy, and you have to really read the client's presentation and affect and figure out, okay, where's my foothold going to be? Is this going to be a slow walk? Are they Are they ready? What's the low hanging fruit? And trying to, find out what that carrot of motivation is. And if you push too
Yeah.
hard, we all know that men will just terminate therapy on their own. Like, oh, I'm fine, I'm better. Like they'll quietly quit, right?
Yeah.
Um, as it goes. So I think that is the fear as a therapist for me with clients, especially male clients that are more along the lines of being machismo or masculine, dominant oriented. Like I really have to be careful I don't challenge them too hard too soon because
Mhm.
but I never really thought about it as me in terms of asking them to submit, but that makes sense.
Yeah. And if they're
Yeah.
insecure, right? Like they don't want to
Right.
submit to you. They don't want to be like, oh man, this guy freaking sees me. You know, this guy
Yeah.
really made me like feel something, or this other man made me cry. Right. For someone
Mm-hmm.
in that like machismo, toxic masculinity thing, it's like that's their worst nightmare. So I think it's a
Yeah.
lot of like rapport building, and more importantly than rapport is like respect building. You know, I have a whole
Mm-hmm.
presentation. I won't, I won't do it now, but the kind of the punchline of that is that, women in therapy need safety, but men need respect. And I think our culture is or not our culture, our industry, sorry, is so focused on generating safety in the room
Mm-hmm.
that we miss respect. And men, right, because of our privilege and our station in life, especially in Western countries, like we're safe. We're the safest dudes out there, right? So like we don't really need safety, but respect comes from kind of what you're saying, like challenging adequately. It comes from the way that me and my other guys work is like self-disclosing, like letting them know, hey, I've
Mm-hmm.
been there, right? Humanizing,
Mm-hmm.
being able to talk on a like the blunt level that men talk. I think those kind of toxic masculine dudes, like they really don't like therapy language. They don't like feeling talked and lectured at. They don't like feeling like they're
Mm-hmm.
being like taken to school. So getting kind of
Mm-hmm.
down and dirty with them, right? Cursing if you need to, talking about the kind of the more brutal sides of masculinity, our sexuality, for instance, our aggression, like letting them know,
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, I get it. And some of the work that my company does, like those retreats that you mentioned, like doing
Mm-hmm.
stuff physically and just displaying strength. I mean, it's very primal, but when you go hiking with somebody and you kind of overcome something together with another man, you just feel closer to them. I think it's biological that if you conquer a challenge together, you're like, hey, sweet, I respect this guy. He didn't fuck it up. Like we did this together. Um,
Yeah, this isn't so
yeah, so
weird,
so I
right?
think respect needs to be
Yeah,
built and talked a lot more in the therapy room.
that makes sense. And I feel like that's one of the biggest overarching goals I typically have in therapy is how
Yeah.
do I get people into a community that's in line with their values and their goals, their growth goals, right? Outside of the therapy room. And you can lead therapy groups and that's all good, but how do, one of my, how I'm always trying to drive them toward is how do we find a way to link you to a community that fills your cup. And
Yeah.
so the fact that you've already built that in to the work you're doing is fantastic because it's there and it's intimate, but it's not sterile either,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Like, yeah, we get out into the world. I mean, we do like community hikes. Like we just had one last weekend. Like we're like doing real shit and they can talk to each other, right? We actually encourage them to be friends, you know, and like
Mm-hmm.
create real connections. 'Cause I think that's what men need. I mean, men are so isolated. We're so unbelievably isolated. One is a function of our jobs, another is a function, I think, of technology. But
Mm-hmm.
you talk about another reason why therapy fails men, or we're not good at it, is that just talking, doing what you and I are doing. Like we're both practitioners, so we can do this. But for the average male, this is really threatening to like literally make eye contact. And there's research that backs this up. It's pretty wild when they look at men in the wild or at the
Mm-hmm.
playground, right? Like women sit face to face and they have eye contact and they can just like stare into each other's eyes for hours and really feel connected. Men sit in parallel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes, the classic is like dudes on the couch watching the game, right? Or
Right.
if you go biologically, it's like guys, sitting in the bushes watching a deer, but we
Mm-hmm.
connect like in parallel. So even just being in eye contact for 50 minutes is like really weird to guys,
That
right?
makes
And
sense.
yeah, and like,
Yeah.
yeah, then I'd rather do a retreat. I'd rather climb a 1,400-foot mountain, 40,000-foot mountain, or they'd rather, start a new diet or fast, do intermittent fasting for like 2 years, or, join a
Mm-hmm.
CrossFit gym or go get beat up at Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Like, we'd much rather do that than like sit face to face and talk to somebody, and I don't think our
Right.
industry really understands how weird it is to just talk to somebody about ourselves for that amount of time.
And I get in touch with that sometimes as a therapist. I'm like, oh, I guess what I do every day is not normal for a lot of people. Yeah, I have to
No.
remember, when they come in that room for them, like for anyone, it's a very vulnerable space. But certainly for someone who's used to having their walls up and is very self-conscious, which typically is the case for men, right?
Totally, yeah.
So,
And I think
yeah.
men like we excel in roles. So like, you can have a guy who's talking for his job, but maybe he's like a salesman. So he knows he knows what the game
Mm,
is, right? Or maybe he's a corporate dude that's giving presentations. Like he knows what the
right.
game is. I think when it's
It's their
like
narrative. Yeah.
open-ended, just talk about your soul.
Hmm.
No, thank you. That's like it's way too threatening for a lot of guys.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so, along those lines, what advice would you have for therapists looking to respect, like really focus on maybe respect over safety
Mhm.
and being informed, right? Informed care about how scary that really is for men to jump in to a
Yeah.
situation like that.
So a couple things. I mean, I think in the beginning, as you're building rapport, like don't get frustrated with object-oriented conversations. If the guy wants to tell you about his car or about his job or about like his fishing trip, like that is male bonding. Like that's the male trying to bond with you and trying to like tell you about his life. And similarly, like don't shy away from doing that with him, right? It's like knowing how males communicate. And in the beginning, it's all outside the room. It's all about things. It's all about our hobbies. It's all about our challenges, war stories. Like, I think a lot of therapists rush into the emotional stuff way too fast. And like you said, they kind of spook the men or they make the men be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, what? Like, this guy doesn't even know me. Why is he asking me all these crazy questions? So I think there's that level of like self disclosing and talking about, who you are by what you do, right? I think as men, we're so much about what you do, whereas I think more feminine individuals, it's like who you are and that kind of thing. So I think that's one. I think another one is don't be afraid to challenge. I think a lot of men, when I talk to almost every guy I talk to, because I do a ton of these intake calls, because now I'm
Mm,
giving people to my team, right? I ask like, hey, what would make us the best therapist you've ever had? And I would say 8 out of 10, literally no lie. They say, call me all my bullshit. They say that. I say the
mm,
exact same line. I want a therapist that calls me all my bullshit. And I think as therapists, we're trained. I was trained this way too, to be very validating and very
mm-hmm.
accepting and very, positive reframes, right? And being like, oh, that wasn't your fault. It's because you're traumatized as a kid. And that's valuable for sure, right? But a lot of these men, masculine dudes, like they want someone to be like, that was kind of effed up. Or, hey, I think you could have done better in that situation. Or, you told me that you value honesty, and now you're telling me that you're kind of lying to your wife. Like, what's the deal with that? So really
Sure.
like holding their feet to the fire as a way of respecting them. And even saying,
Even when
look,
we're making mental notes, like, okay, that's incongruent, or
yeah,
they just, I'm going to circle back to that in 3 sessions when we have built rapport. Like you're saying, sometimes just kind of address it as soon as we catch it. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think like
yeah.
as therapists, we all kind of know like the values card sort. I'm sure you got trained on that. Like you just write your values down and stuff, right?
Hmm.
So
Oh,
from
I do it all the time. Yeah,
yeah, that's all you need to do. With dudes, literally, like
I
the
keep a
hack.
stack of index cards just for that on my therapy, coffee table.
Yeah. So the work I call that building an honor code. Like that's when I train my clinicians, it's like just do that and then do not forget what they said. Because I think what a lot of therapists is like they do the values exercise and then they just like forget about it and they get lost in something else, right? But it's like do the values exercise and then hold them to that value, right? Hold them to what they actually answered. And that's content for freaking years of therapy,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think as men, we are very structured, we're very linear, and having like a code and I told with my guys is like, every masculine kind of group has had a code. If you look at like the army, or the Knights of the Round Table or samurai, like or the Bible even, right? It's
Right.
like we are a codified gender. So if we can really have something external to ourselves that we generated, right? Like it's made by them, that is very, very powerful. And I think it's the therapist's role to hold them to that higher version of themselves.
Yeah, and they can't really argue with it if it's of their own creation. Right.
They made it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they made the bed. Now they got to sleep in it kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Thank you for that. I'll be sure to maybe lead with that, like you said, and then they can always use that to call them out.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, it's great. What would you say is kind of the next, once we've built that rapport, once they've started to feel more comfortable in therapy, like what do you think would be the next kind of phase of therapy when we're dealing with men to make it work so they don't quietly quit or ghost once they kind of start getting into that deep work. We've kind of cracked through that exterior, right?
Mhm.
We put in the time to build a rapport and maybe not jump in too soon. But once we do crack that shell, like what do you think is typically is have you noticed a pattern or do you have like a in your mind, I think all therapists kind of work through their mind. Okay, like I don't know if you play chess, but whenever I'm playing chess, I'm like, okay, so I have this opening and these five follow-up moves, and I have this opening and these follow-up moves, and what kind of person am I dealing with, and which once you get into the middle of it, it gets more obviously um, artsy, in terms of how we
Mhm.
approach things. It's very unique, very tailored to the person. But I think as therapists, we do have a certain kind of phases or the ways we approach different clients, if that makes sense.
Totally.
So
Yeah. So
for men, yeah, I don't know kind of what your experience has been in particular.
yeah, I can give you a roadmap that I use with most of my clients, right? So it's kind of four parts. The first part is villain. So it's villain to victim to hero to guide. And
Mm,
I'll walk through what that looks like, right? So I think a lot of men come to therapy feeling that they're a villain, right? Divorced dad, for instance, right? Like, oh, I messed it up. I ruined my relationship. I'm the bad guy. A lot of men come to therapy because their wives make them, right? And they have an ultimatum. Hey, if you don't do therapy, I'm going to divorce you.
mm-hmm,
Or if you don't
mm-hmm,
do therapy, you're never going to see your kids again, right? Or, something where there's a hard check of like, oh my God, I'm an alcoholic. I'm a villain. I'm a bad person. So a lot of guys start there. The first goal is to get them to feel like a victim, which I think our industry does really well, right? I think
hmm,
again, that's that validation. That's the like, oh, it was your childhood. It was because of your trauma. It was because your parents never taught you X, Y, and Z. It's because you were hurt, in A, B, and C way. And I think as an industry, like, and how I was trained, that is where therapy starts and ends. But I think a lot of men bounce off because we ultimately don't want to feel like victims. I think it helps to make us not feel like villains, not feel like we're just like bad people, but you do the shame busting stuff, right? You give them a reason, you give them a narrative, you give them kind of like, pull the camera back and, hey, it's because your parents, failed in X, Y, and Z ways. And guess what? Their parents failed in these other ways. And it's a whole line and all that stuff, right? Like I think as
mm-hmm,
therapists, we do that well. But I think what lacks, and that's what I was talking about a little bit with the values exercise, is going from victim to hero, right? So it's the idea of like, okay, now you know this about yourself and you know how you're calibrated. Hey, maybe you're insecure about X, Y, and Z. Maybe you're sensitive to whatever, maybe you're very conflict avoidant, whatever your kind of manual is. But it's like, what are you going to do about it? And that's
mm-hmm,
where a lot of therapy work happens outside of the room. It's planning a conversation with their spouse. It is,
mm-hmm.
like you mentioned, getting them involved in community, like for real, like actually go to something, join a team,
Right, right.
join a gym, actually do it for real.
Some
Um,
skin in the
you know,
game. Yeah.
if guys are insecure, if a guy's insecure about his weight, for instance, right? Like a guy's overweight, I think like the traditional therapist would be like, you know what? Love yourself, accept yourself, like do what you need to do. You're beautiful. As men, we don't want to hear that. We want someone to help us get in shape, you know?
Right,
So it's like,
right.
if you're
Something
insecure,
tactical. Yeah.
impactful. Yeah. Right. It's
Yeah.
like, write down what you're insecure about. And like, I will help you actually shore those things up. So you're not insecure about it. That's back to the respect. It's like you want to be able to look yourself in the mirror and be like, I respect that dude. He's not perfect. No one is, but like he's trying. He's getting to the gym. He's like, he's sober. He's like working on his relationships, right? Like to have enough respect for oneself. And then the final step, which I think is optional for all men, but I think it's helpful, is going to a guide. And like I mentioned before, I think like fatherhood is the one that I think most men go to. I think being a leader, in their community, in their, in their church, in their job, joining a men's group and shepherding younger men.
Mm,
I kind of came up in AA, so that's kind of like the 12th step, right? Being a sponsor, you know, but finding a way to, after you've been the hero, is like take a step back and help other guys that were where you were at, go through those same levels. So that's kind of
that makes a
the
lot of
overarching
sense.
framework that I use. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good framework. Reminds me kind of that. I always knew I would push clients toward kind of the same phases, eventually toward acts of service,
Yeah.
Understand
Yeah.
that self-actualization, right, is the ideal. Once we've met your basic needs and you've learned the skills, now you've set your goals, now you can take some action steps toward your goals, get outside your comfort zone, have some wins, right? Then you see the outcomes, and then how can we be of service, right? And that is kind of the framework that's usually floating around in my head when I'm working with a client. Where are we at across the spectrum here? But I really like the way you lay that out. Goes victim to hero to guide, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Victim, victim, victor, hero, guide. Was that it?
Villain, victim,
Villain,
hero,
sorry.
guide.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it.
So I
Villain,
find that helps
victim,
with guys.
hero,
And I
guide.
think,
Yeah.
to kind of your point around the existential self-actualization thing, and this is maybe more of a millennial thing, but you let me know. I think as millennials, we were told that our life meaning has to be something really grand and really like positive, right? Like cure cancer or save the whales or,
Mm-hmm.
get someone to the moon, right? We were told that we could do anything. So a lot of our meaning, I found a lot of guys struggle because like they're living ordinary lives. Like they didn't cure
Mm.
cancer. They're just like working as a mechanic somewhere, or they're like, a manager of a restaurant, right? Like it's like, and they're pissed because like, oh my God, I thought I was supposed to like, get us all to Mars or something, but it's like, I'm just
Mm-hmm.
managing like an Olive Garden.
Right.
But
Right.
what I tell guys, and I think it's something that the older generation did better than us, that we can take from them from traditional masculinity is like, your meaning is your commitments, right? Like meaning doesn't have to be this like big, Marvel superhero mission. It's your commitments. So it can be your commitment to your wife. It can be your commitment to your partner. It can be your commitment to your child. It could be your commitment to your community. It could be your commitment to your home, right? Fixing up your house, taking care of your yard. Like I think as men, like that's where our meaning comes from is, and then we get to practice masculine traits, right? Like discipline and consistency and dependability and honesty and truth telling. We get to, in our commitments, really show up. And that's part of that guide process too, right? It's like committing to things, committing to other people, committing to communities. And men, when they get those commitments and they really, really dial them in, they're happy. Because I think
Mm.
ultimately we just want to belong and we just want to feel like we're important and we want to feel like we are supporting and providing for other people and things in our worlds, that
Yeah.
we matter. Like that's
Makes
meaning.
sense.
That's
Yeah,
meaning.
that we matter, that we're making a difference, and that we can take pride in the work we're doing. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, we have impact
Absolutely.
in the real
Mm-hmm.
world.
Mm-hmm. That's so important, and you brought that up. That whole idea of this grandiose ideal, that we have to
Mhm.
have these great accomplishments or something. I saw that. I would see that a lot with young adults in the therapy room with failure to launch. I'm not checking the boxes like my peers. I should be here. I should be there at this stage of my life. And you kind of see that across the lifespan when, especially with men, I've noticed when you don't feel like they've checked the boxes in a timely fashion. It
Mhm.
can be really, really shattering to their identity,
Totally.
as they're comparing themselves to their peers. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's really good stuff. And so finding a way to have them find commitments that are meaningful, that are within their control, right?
Mhm.
If you're dealing with a male client who wants to have a kid and they can't have kids and IVF is failing, that kind of stuff, then you can only control so much. So what can we control, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What are you doing well? Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, what do you want to get out of being a father? Okay, if that's not going to happen to you, yeah, mourn it, grieve it. But then back to that hero mentality, it's like, okay, can you mentor somebody? Can you volunteer somewhere? Can you get
Mm-hmm.
involved with kids, work at a school or do an after
Mm-hmm.
school program, sharing something that you love, right? You don't have to be a teacher, but maybe
Mm-hmm.
you don't. Maybe you like mountain biking, do mountain biking club for local high school, right? Like there's ways to pivot. And I think that is also a very masculine trait is being adaptable, and being tactical, being able to know
Yes.
when to retreat, when to flank, when to feint, like, doing tactics and figuring out how that works.
We have a question. What specific advice do you have for female therapists working with male clients?
Mm.
Specifically, what are some of the pitfalls you've encountered or have heard about that female therapists do? Thank you, SN, for that. Let's
It's a
see.
great,
Is this
great,
something we
great
can chew on?
question. Great question. Yeah. Yeah. I talk about this all the time. So I will say right off the bat, I think for the female therapist, it's harder. I think it's harder. I think as men, we're going to connect with men more honestly And that's, I think, because of privilege and oppression dynamics. I just got to name that right out the gate, right? Like, I think as when a man's working with a woman, one of two things happen, right? Either they make the woman their mom and they just like bleed emotions all over her, right? But they don't take any action. They're just going for pure nurturance, right? In psychoanalysis, it's called like the good teat, basically, right? They're just like trying to suck all the positive energy, but nothing really happens. They don't make change in their life, right? Or the other one is they kind of do the misogynist thing where they don't trust the woman to handle their emotions. So they're kind of like lying, or they're even flirting, or they're holding things back. Because as men, and this is wrong, right? But as men, we're like, well, my emotions are too much for me. There's no way a woman could handle my emotions. And we're just wrong, because women, I think in general, have way higher emotional capacity and are way more emotionally intelligent than the average man. So
Do you feel like there's opportunity for the female therapist to provide that corrective experience for a male
yes,
client?
yes. And I think the way to do that is to be okay challenging and naming those things, right? Again, not in a shaming way, that's the art form of it, but naming the misogyny, right? Naming if there's attraction happening in the room, right? Sexual or motherly attraction, right? Really, really cutting through the bullshit in a way that, again, generates that respect. So being able to just like call a spade is very helpful, you know, being able to kind of wade into those masculine waters and give some of that tough love. I find that men really need that. And not being afraid, right? Because I think, again, because of the oppression of women, you know, a lot of women are conditioned to be afraid of men and conditioned to, you know, make sure that they're pleasing us and that we don't get angry and that, you know, they're just taking care of our every need. And that's ingrained in many women. So doing their own work to overcome that and not being afraid of the male's emotions, or not being afraid of, you know, what if the guy gets upset, or what if he gets angry? It's like, what if he does, right? You have the power in the room. You are the therapist.
Right.
You have the
That's
power.
addressing that countertransference, right?
100%.
Yeah,
100%. Yep.
for sure. Well, thank you so much, Mark. These have been wonderful, wonderful insights. And I knew this would be a great topic. And what a time for Mental Health Month, you know, as we talk about how we can serve at our best as therapists. And the better we understand what's in the room, the better we can tweak our interventions to make sure that we're not unintentionally doing a disservice to our clients.
Right.
Right? We're repeating the same pattern of experience they've had, either, you know, with other therapists or even outside the therapy room within that dynamic. So thank you so much. You know, this is really I know it's gonna help me and the work I do, for sure. Absolutely.
Great. Yeah. Happy to come on the show.
Yeah. Um, so this is your website.
It is.
And if anyone listening, watching the replay, listening to the podcast, want to learn more about the work you're doing or refer their clients to your community, they would head over to Men's Therapy Online. Yeah.
Yeah, menstherapy.online. Check it out. Everything's there. There's a ton of free stuff. So if you're a clinician or you're a dude, like, subscribe to our podcast. It's Men's Therapy Podcast. It's very, very direct. Interview guys every week. Plus do solo shows on there. So that's an opportunity to stay informed and to educate yourself on that. And that's entirely free. We also have a bunch of free email courses and blogs and stuff. So yeah, check out the website. Everything's on there. And that's great. There's the podcast.
Now, you're based in Colorado. Is your home base?
Correct. Yeah, I'm based in Colorado, but we have
Denver?
clinicians across the nation. So we're licensed in Oregon, Utah, California, New York, Florida, and Colorado.
Great. And so your retreats, how do those typically work?
Yeah, so we got two of them. One is in spring, and that's a traditional men's retreat. It's with psychodrama. So actually, my therapist, a man named Rick Tivers from Chicago, comes out, and we co-facilitate it together. He's like an old psychodramatist that was there from the inception of that methodology. So we do that one, and then in the summer, I think our next one is in August 8th through 10th. We do a backpacking retreat. And that one's more like a wellness vacation. So that's a really big community one. You know, we do men's groups and we do some wilderness therapy light, but really that's a community building retreat. And it's for a lot of our guys that are in our online groups to hang out with each other and do something real in nature, you know, like that's actually great. Bond and build that respect.
It's wonderful. So as far as your groups and stuff, like group therapy or other ways to connect with other men through your practice, is that down on a local level? Or how does that typically work?
Oh, they're online. Yeah, they're online. So, you know, the individual work and the groups are all online.
Oh, that makes it easy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, this is wonderful. I'll be poking around in here. Got all your socials here at the bottom.
Mhm.
Phone address, easy to find, easy to remember. Men's Therapy Online doesn't get much more straightforward than that.
That's the idea. Helps with SEO too.
I love it. I love it. My website name is way too long. But once I was committed, it was too late.
Mhm.
Very cool. So thank you so much, Mark. All the wonderful work you're doing. I appreciate you. I will be sure to, put it's already up on YouTube. Podcast will probably go out next week. Show notes, blog. I'll be sure to share all that with your community as well. And then you're always welcome back on. If you want to share more about the work you're doing, just reach out.
For sure. Yeah. Happy to come back on. Enjoyed it.
Last call, anybody? Any last questions? Going once? Going twice? All right. Well, with that, keep thriving. Thank you for the work you're doing, and I wish you a wonderful and fantastic rest of your week, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.